The cold came down like a judgment. It settled deep in the canyons of New Mexico, painting the high red rock with a blue, brittle frost. Eli felt it in his teeth. He felt it more in the ragged, wet hole in his side, where the world was trying to leak out of him. His horse, a good mare named Steady, stumbled beneath him, her breath pluming in the dying light. "Just a little more, girl," he whispered, his voice a dry crackle. But the mare was done, and so, almost, was he. The bounty mission had been a bust. The target, a rustler with a fast gun and no conscience, had been waiting for them. Eli's partner was dead, back on the mesa, and Eli was riding with a gut shot, carrying nothing but his own failure. The blood had frozen stiff on his wool trousers, a dark, hard crust from his hip to his knee. He slumped over the saddle horn, the world tilting. The canyon walls seemed to bend inward, the sky a closing sliver of bruised purple. He was riding on memory now, the memory of a man who knew how to stay alive. But that man was fading. Weakness was a cold, heavy blanket, and he was so very tired of fighting it. He lost track of time. The hoofbeats of the mare were a dull thud, matching the hammering in his skull. Then the mare stopped. She whickered, low and nervous. Eli forced his head up. His vision swam. Through the thickening dusk and the first few lazy flakes of snow, he saw it. Not a mirage, a light, a pinprick of yellow. High up, tucked into a fold of the cliff like a secret. A chimney trailed a thin ribbon of smoke. A cabin, here, in the absolute middle of nowhere. He had no strength left to call out. He just nudged the mare with his good leg. She lurtoled forward, scrambling up a narrow, hidden trail he never would have seen. It led to a small, level clearing. The cabin was dug into the rock, part timber, part stone. It looked less like it was built and more like it had grown there. Eli slid from the saddle. He didn't dismount. He fell. His legs buckled, and the impact sent a fresh, blinding wave of nausea through him. He crawled. He gripped the frozen dirt with his gloved hands and dragged himself the last few feet. His hand hit the solid wood of the doorstep. He raised his fist and knocked once, a dull, weak thud. Then he laid his head on the wood, the cold biting at his cheek, and let the darkness take him. He woke to pain, sharp, searing, and focused. He was on his back, on a cot, and he was warm. The warmth was a shock. A fire snapped in a small hearth nearby. A shadow moved. He tried to sit up, and a bolt of fire shot through his side. He choked back a groan. "Don't move!" The voice was low and rough with disuse, a woman's voice. He blinked, his eyes stinging from the smoke. She was a silhouette against the fire. He could make out a narrow frame, a heavy braid of dark hair, and the glint of a rifle she held in the crook of her arm. Nowhere you need to worry on," she said. She stepped forward, just enough for the firelight to catch her face. She was young, maybe 25, but her eyes were old. They were wide and dark and held a deep, settled wariness, the kind a body earns from expecting the worst and getting it. "You're bleeding all over my floor," she said, but there was no venom in it. It was just a fact. She laid the rifle on a table and came toward him with a basin of steaming water and some clean rags. She didn't ask his permission. She just lifted the corner of his wool shirt, which she had already cut away, revealing the makeshift bandage beneath. He hadn't even felt her do it. He sucked in his breath as she peeled the blood-soaked cloth away. The wound was ugly, a dark, puckered mouth. "Bullet's still in," she stated. "I figured," Eli managed. "It needs to come out, or you'll fester. You gonna..." "I'm not, but I'll clean it. The rest is up to God and your own stubbornness." She was relentless. She cleaned the wound with water so hot it made him dizzy, then packed it with a dark, bitter-smelling mash of herbs. He had seen medicine men use similar poultices on the plains. She bound it tight with clean linen, her hands quick and sure. They were chapped red, but they did not tremble. When she was done, she stood back. She offered him no water, no comfort. She just watched him. "Who are you?" he asked. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter." "I'm Eli." She gave a small, stiff nod, as if acknowledging a piece of furniture. She didn't offer her name in return. He looked around as she moved back to the fire, stoking it. The cabin was small. A single room. Her own narrow bed was in the far corner. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs. A cold stove for cooking, though she seemed to prefer the hearth. The floor was packed earth, but it was swept so clean it shone. There were no pictures, no crosses, no mirrors, nothing personal at all. It was as sparse as a monk's cell, but it was fortified. The single window had thick wooden shutters, bolted from the inside. The front door he had collapsed against had a heavy timber bar resting beside it, ready to be dropped. And there was another door. It was on the back wall, leading to what must be a small storage room dug into the cliff. It was a simple plank door, but it had a new, heavy iron bolt fixed on this side, bolted shut. It was this, more than her silence, that prickled his senses. You don't bolt an inner door against the cold. You bolt it against a person or to keep something in. He must have been staring, because her voice cut through his thoughts. "You'll sleep now." She brought him a tin cup. Not water, a hot, bitter tea. "Drink it." He was too weak to argue. He drank. The herbs tasted of dirt and roots. Before he could finish, the cabin, the fire, and the silent woman began to blur. His last thought was that the cabin didn't just feel clean. It felt scrubbed, wiped clean of any identity at all, like she was trying to erase herself, or something else. He drifted for days. He woke and slept, time marked only by the woman's movements. She would appear, force the bitter tea or a thin, hot broth down his throat, check his wound, and disappear back into her silence. He'd hear her mending, sweeping, or just sitting. Sometimes he would wake in the deep of night and she would be sitting in the chair by the fire, the rifle across her lap, just staring into the flames. Not sleeping, waiting. His fever broke on the 3rd day. He woke feeling hollowed out, but clear. The pain in his side was a dull, manageable ache instead of a hot blade. He saw her tending to the fire, and he noted how careful she was. She kept the flames low, just enough for warmth, not enough to cast a bright, betraying light. When dusk fell, she didn't light a lantern, and before she did, she went to the single window and hung a heavy, patchwork quilt over it, securing every corner so not a single crack of light could escape into the canyon. She was not just surviving out here. She was hiding. He healed slowly. The enforced quiet settled on him. He was a man used to the sound of wind on the prairie, the jingle of spurs, the rowdy noise of saloons and bunkhouses. This silence was deeper. It was the silence of 2 people holding their breath. He tried to talk. "That poultice works good." She nodded, darning a sock. "My mother used to use yarrow for most things." She did not look up. "Weather's turning." He tried again, hearing the first hiss of sleet against the shutters. "It's winter," she said. That was all. One night, he woke. The fire was embers, the cabin near dark. The wind was high, a thin, lonely scream in the chimney. And then he heard it, under the sound of the wind. Faint but unmistakable. A cry. Not a coyote pup, not the wind. It was thin, reedy, and human. A baby. It came from behind the bolted door. He froze. He listened. It came again. A short, muffled wail. Quickly shushed. He turned his head. In the gloom, he could just see her. She was standing by the bolted door, her back to him, her hand pressed flat against the wood. She stood like that for a long minute, her head bowed. When she turned back, he pretended to be asleep, but he had seen her face in the dying firelight. It was a mask of such anguish and terror that it made his own wound feel like a scratch. The next morning, He couldn't hold it in. I heard something last night," he said, his voice rough. She was cleaning the rifle, her movements short, jerky. "Coyotes. I told you." "It wasn't coyotes." Her head snapped up. Her eyes were dangerous. "You dreamt it. The fever." "My fever's broke," he said, keeping his voice level. It sounded like a child. She stood, slamming the rifle down on the table. The sound cracked through the small room. "It was nothing. It was the wind. You are here on my kindness. Do not make me regret it. You do not ask questions. You do not talk about what you think you heard, and you do not ever look at that door again. Those are the rules." He stared at her, this small, fierce woman who had saved his life and was now threatening him with her eyes. He saw the desperation in her. She was a cornered animal. He gave a slow nod. "All right, the wind." She watched him for a beat, then seemed to deflate. She picked up the rifle and finished her work in silence. The snow began that afternoon. It was not the few flakes from before. This was the real thing. A heavy, wet snow that fell straight down, thick as a curtain. It fell for 2 days without stopping. Eli stood, leaning on a stick he'd found, and looked out the small, unshuttered window. The world was gone. The canyon was a sea of white. The pass would be 10 feet deep. His mare was likely dead or gone. He was trapped. He turned. She was watching him. She knew it too. The cabin, which had felt like a refuge, now felt like a cell. The proximity was stifling. He could smell the soap she used on her laundry, the wood smoke in her hair. He was acutely aware of every time she moved, every time she sighed. He had to do something, or go mad. I can split some of your wood," he said, gesturing to the small pile she kept inside. "If you've got an axe." She hesitated, her eyes going to his bandaged side. "I'm not an invalid," he said, pride stinging him. "I'm weak, but I'm not useless. I can't just sit." She considered him. Then she nodded toward the corner. The work was a blessing. He took the axe and a few logs and sat on the floor by the hearth. The simple, repetitive thunk of the axe biting into the piñon pine was a relief. It was a normal sound. He worked. She cooked. They didn't speak, but the tension eased. The shared, simple work of survival built a strange, thin bridge between them. He chopped. She made a stew out of a snared rabbit. He patched a hole in his saddlebag. She mended his shirt, the one she had cut. The isolation was a weight that pressed them flat. And in that flattening, pieces of themselves began to show. "You're good with that needle," he observed one evening. She paused. "My mother taught me." It was the first personal thing she had ever said. "Mine, too," he said, though it was a lie. His mother had died when he was 6. Well, she tried. A flicker. The smallest ghost of a smile touched her mouth before she pressed it away. "She must not have been a very good teacher." "No, I wasn't a very good student." A silence fell, but it was a different kind, less heavy. He found himself talking. He told her about a horse he'd had once, a mean-tempered roan that only he could ride. He told her about seeing the ocean one time, in California, and how it had scared him more than any desert. He talked about the loneliness. "Sometimes you ride for so long," he said, staring at his hands. "You forget the sound of your own voice. You start to feel thin, like you're not really there at all." She listened, her hands still in her lap. "Yes," she whispered. "Thin." He talked about his past, not the details, but the shadow it cast. "I've ridden for pay, done things I'm not proud of, seen men do worse. It soils you. You try to wash it off, but it stays in your skin." The blizzard hit 2 days later. It was a howling white monster that clawed at the cabin, shrieking down the chimney. For 3 days, they could not see the hand in front of their face out the window. The world ceased to exist. There was only the room, the fire, and the storm. The fear was palpable. The cabin groaned. They took turns keeping the fire alive, burning through her woodpile at an alarming rate, in the forced, terrifying intimacy of the storm. The last of their defenses crumbled. She told him her name. Isabel? He told her about the partner he'd lost. He was a good man, didn't deserve to die for a few cows. He confessed the bounty. That's what I was, a bounty hunter, a man-catcher. It's no clean living. She just nodded, as if she already knew. No, she said, it ain't. On the fourth morning, the wind finally died. The silence it left was as loud as the storm had been. Eli woke stiffly. His side ached from the cold. The fire was just embers. Isabel was not in her bed. He turned his head. She was sitting on the stool, not far from his cot. She was just watching him, as she had that first night. But the fear was gone. In its place was a sorrow so deep, it looked like it had hollowed her out from the inside. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. She wasn't sobbing. She was just leaking, as if something inside her had finally broken open. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Eli, she whispered. Her voice was a cracked reed. Ma'am, Isabel. She looked at him, her eyes searching his, grabbing at him. She looked desperate, like a drowning person looking at a sliver of wood. Do you believe people can come back? He frowned. Come back? From the worst things, she choked out. The worst things they've ever done, or the worst things that have been done to them. Can they ever be clean again? The question hung in the freezing air, sharp and glittering as an icicle. He saw his own soiled hands, the blood he'd spilled. He saw her haunted, watchful eyes, and he knew, with a sudden, sinking certainty, that her question was not just for him. It was for both of them, and he had no answer at all. Eli watched her, the question hanging in the cold air between them like a held breath. He had no easy answer. He wasn't a preacher. He was a man who knew more about endings than beginnings. Clean? He finally said, his voice rough. No, I don't reckon a man ever gets truly clean, not from the worst of it. He saw her shoulders slump, a small, defeated movement. But come back, he continued, rubbing his jaw. Maybe you don't come back to who you were, but maybe you come back to something else, someone who knows better. He didn't know if it was the right thing to say, but it was the truest. It was his own story. The admission seemed to unlock something in him. The blizzard had passed, but the cabin remained their whole world, a small bubble of warmth against a vast, frozen wilderness. The silence needed filling, and his own past came spilling into it. He started to talk, not to make her feel better, but because he had to. He told her about his life before the bounty, a farm that failed, a wife taken by fever, the emptiness that followed. A man with nothing, he said, staring at the fire. It's a dangerous thing. He'll do anything for pay, for purpose, even a bad one. He told her about signing on with a man tracking rustlers, how it felt good. At first, righteous, bringing bad men to justice. Then the lines blurred. The bounties got bigger. The men he hunted got less guilty. One time, he said, his voice dropping low, we tracked a man, a kid, really, for horse theft. Found him in a shack near the Cimarron. He came out, hands high. He'd stolen the horse. Sure enough, but his wife was inside, sick with child. He was just trying to get her to a doctor. My partner didn't care. Said the warrant was the warrant. Eli paused, the memory coiling in his gut. The kid. He made a move. Just a stupid, scared move. Back toward the cabin, my partner raised his rifle. I was faster. I thought the kid was going for a gun. He swallowed. He wasn't. He was just scared. He fell, and I saw he didn't even have a holster. He was just a boy. He looked at his own hands. I took the blood money, but I quit the outfit. Been drifting since that blood didn't deserve spilling. And there's others, not all so clear, but they're all heavy. He fell silent. He had laid his own ugliness on the table. He glanced at Isabel. She was listening. Her hands were clenched tight in her lap. But her sorrow, he realized, was different from his. His was a poison he'd swallowed himself. Hers felt like a shield. She wasn't just grieving. She was defending something. Her eyes, when they met his, were not just sad. They were vigilant. It was a watching sorrow, the kind a sentry gets, staring out into the dark, waiting for the enemy. He suspected, with a cold knot of certainty, that she was not grieving for herself at all. The days settled into a new, tense routine. They had confessed their brokenness, but the secret behind her bolted door remained. The snow was deep, but the sun was bright, making the white world outside blinding. They worked. He chopped wood. She cooked. They reinforced a loose shutter. The small, shared tasks were a language. The tension broke over something small. He was restless. His wound was healing, itching, and the confinement was wearing on him. He paced the small cabin. On a high shelf, above her cot, was a small, neat pile of folded linens. Most were plain muslin, but one, on the bottom, was different. A corner of it stuck out. It was a soft, woven blanket, and its edge was thick with colorful embroidery, flowers and birds, stitched with a skill he found surprising. It was the only beautiful, personal thing in the entire cabin. Without thinking, moved by a simple curiosity to see something other than rough wood and gray wool, he reached up. He pulled it slightly, just to look at the pattern. "Don't touch that." The words were not loud, but they were sharp as a razor. He flinched, his hand dropping as if burned. He turned. Isabel was standing by the hearth, a pot in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with a cold fire he had not seen before. It was not anger. It was pure, undiluted panic. The stitching," he stammered, feeling like a fool. "It's not yours to touch," she said, her voice shaking. "Nothing here is, do you understand? Nothing." "Isabel, I meant no harm." "You will leave it be," she cried, and this time her voice did break. She slammed the pot down on the stones, water splashing. She turned her back to him, her shoulders shaking. He backed away, raising his hands. "All right, I'm sorry, I won't touch it again." She said nothing, but the truce was broken. The walls were back up, higher and colder than the snowdrifts outside. That night, the crying started again. The storm had passed. The wind was still. There was no excuse. It was not the faint, reedy sound he'd heard before. This was a full-throated, insistent wail. A baby, hungry and afraid. It went on, muffled by the door, but undeniable. Eli lay on his cot, his heart pounding. He heard Isabel rise. He heard her whispering, her voice frantic. "Hush! Oh, hush! Please! Please hush!" The crying softened, but didn't stop. It became a low, miserable fussing. He stared at the ceiling. All the pieces clicked into place. The bolted door, the scrubbed cabin, the terror, the lies about coyotes and wind, the blanket. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't madness. She was hiding a child. But why? Why this terrible secrecy? Why the fortified cabin? The fear of firelight? A woman alone with a baby was vulnerable. Yes, but this was more than caution. This was terror. He waited until the next morning. The light was gray. Isabel looked like she hadn't slept in a year. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. She moved about the cabin like a ghost, starting a pot of coffee, avoiding his gaze. He sat up on his cot. He didn't stand. He kept his voice low, gentle. "Isabel." She froze, her back to him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "And I'm not going to hurt that child." She turned slowly. Her face was a mask of stone, but her hands were trembling so hard she hid them in the folds of her skirt. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," he said, and the word was heavy with his own weariness. "Stop. The lies are..." They're not needful. Not with me." He pushed himself to his feet, wincing as his side pulled. He took one step toward her, and she flinched back, her eyes darting to the rifle on the wall. He stopped. "You saved my life," he said, his voice earnest. "You dragged me in from the cold. You cleaned my wound. You fed me from your own stores. You did that for a stranger, a man you had every reason to let die." He looked at her, willing her to see the truth in his face. "I see the fear you're in. It's eating you alive. You saved me. Let me help you now. Let me help you carry whatever this is. You can't do it alone anymore." He expected her to deny it again, to scream, to grab the rifle. Instead, her face crumpled. The stone mask shattered. A sound tore from her throat, a low, animal sound of grief so profound it struck him dumb. She slid down the wall, as if her bones had dissolved, and covered her face with her hands. Her sobs were violent, shaking her whole body. Eli moved slowly. He knelt on the floor a few feet away from her. He didn't touch her. He just waited. He let her cry. He let the years of terror and silence and grief pour out of her onto the cold, clean floor. It was a long time before she could speak. When she did, her voice was a shredded whisper. "She's not mine." Eli waited. "She was my sister's, my little sister, Elena." The story came out in sharp, broken pieces like shards of glass. Elena. She had been bright and soft. She was 17. She had come to stay with Isabel and their parents at their small ranch, down near the border. "She was so pretty," Isabel choked out. "She trusted everyone." Then the men came. Not painted Apaches, not Mexican bandits. They were white men, American men. They wore bits of old uniforms, and one had a badge, a tin star. They called themselves regulators. She spat. The word a curse. "A posse. Said they were looking for thieves. Said we were harboring sympathizers. They tore the ranch apart. Her father tried to stop them. He was an old man. She couldn't say it. Eli's stomach turned to ice. He knew this kind of man. They were there for 2 days," she whispered, her eyes squeezed shut, as if trying to unsee it. "They drank our whiskey. They hurt my father. And Elena." She took a shuddering breath. They took turns. The man with the star, he held her down. They hurt her. They hurt her. Eli, in the worst way. They ruined her." Eli closed his eyes. The cabin felt airless. When they left, they burned the barn, laughed, said it was justice. The aftermath was as brutal as the act. Her father died 2 weeks later. Her mother, her mind just left. She doesn't speak. And Elena was quiet. And then she was sick. And then she was with child. It was a secret, Isabel said, rocking back and forth, her arms wrapped around herself. A shame. She tried to get rid of it, but she couldn't. And when the time came, it killed her. Isabel was weeping freely now, the tears washing the grime from her face. She died. She died right there, in my arms. And the baby lived. Elena, her last breath. She made me promise. Save her, she said. Don't let them find her. Don't let them see her face. So Isabel ran. She took the newborn, a few supplies, and her father's rifle. She fled into the high canyons, to this old line shack her father had used for trapping. She had been here for 6 months, hiding. The men, they're still out there, she whispered, her eyes wide with the remembered terror. They're powerful men. They can't have her found. They can't have anyone knowing. A child. From that. She looked at him, her gaze desperate. You understand? They will kill her. They will kill me, just to to keep the secret buried. Then she gave him the final, terrible piece. "The child? She don't look like us. My sister was fair. Our family is, from here, Spanish. But we look white. But the man, the one with the star, he was not, or maybe one of the others. His skin, the baby." She trailed off. "She's biracial," Eli said, the word flat. "Mestizo," Isabel whispered. "Dark skin, dark hair. You can see it. You can see him in these lands. A child like that, born of that, it's a mark. It's a death sentence. They would kill her just for what she is." Eli reeled. The story hit him like a physical blow. It was not just the cruelty. It was the familiarity. He saw it, the smoke from a burning jackal, the sound of women screaming, the laughter of men with rifles, drunk on power and cheap liquor. He remembered a raid down in Chihuahua, a punitive action. The captain called it pay and survival. He'd ridden with them. He'd stood guard. He'd held the horses while he hadn't touched anyone. He'd told himself that. He wasn't like them, but he had been there. He had taken the pay. He felt sick. He had to lean against the wall. Isabel, exhausted, empty, watched him. She saw the change in his face. She saw the sickness. "What?" she whispered. "What is it?" She seemed to realize, for the first time, that he was the one who needed to answer her question, the one about coming back. She stood up on shaky legs. She looked at him, her face empty of all tears, all fear. There was just a void. "You should see," she said. She walked to the bolted door. Her hands were steady now. She lifted the heavy iron bar and slid the bolt. She opened the door. The room was a tiny storage space, cut into the rock. It was cold, but in the corner, she had built a small world. Furs and blankets lined a small crate. A single, small hole in the chimney flue let in a little warmth. She bent down. When she turned back, she was holding a bundle. She walked into the firelight. She unwrapped the blankets. The baby was tiny, smaller than he thought possible. She was asleep, her small face peaceful. She had a full head of dark, dark hair, and her skin was a beautiful, warm copper. She was, as Isabel had said, visibly mixed, a child of two worlds, born of one world's hatred for the other. Her name, Isabel whispered, her voice fierce with a love that was painful to watch, is Espera. It means hope. Eli looked at the sleeping child, so innocent, so warm, and he felt a cold dread he had never known. This tiny, breathing thing was a secret that could get them all killed. Isabel's protection was absolute, the way she held the child, the way her eyes scanned the room even now. She was a wolf protecting her cub. A terrible, shared grief settled in the room. The grief for Elena, the grief for the world that made this necessary. Eli had to speak. The sickness in his stomach was his own guilt. Rising up. "Isabel," he started, his voice a rasp. "The men you're talking about, the ones who ride under a flag and call it justice." She looked at him, her eyes narrowing. I have ridden with men like that," he confessed. The words tasted like ash. "Down south, in Chihuahua, raids, for pay. They called them pacification. I told myself it was just a job. He saw her face harden. I never touched a woman," he said quickly, desperately. I didn't, but I was there. I heard things. I didn't stop it. I held the horses. I took the gold." The silence that followed was terrifying. Isabel stared at him. The love for the child in her arms turned to pure, cold venom as she looked at him. He was one of them. He was the man who held the horses, the man who let it happen. She took a step back, her arm tightening around Espera, shielding her from his very presence. "Get out," she whispered. "Isabel, I'm still wounded. Get out." Her voice rose. "Get out of my house. She took a step toward the hearth, reaching for the iron poker. "I would rather," she hissed, her face contorted, "die alone in the cold than spend one more second with a man like you." He saw it in her eyes. She meant it. He nodded, a sharp, painful movement. He accepted the judgment. It was just... He turned, grabbing his jacket from the peg. He didn't get his hat. He just walked to the door, his side screaming in protest. He fumbled with the bar. He heard a small noise behind him. A whimper. Espera. The baby, disturbed by the shouting, had woken up and was starting to cry. Isabel was torn. Her eyes darted from Eli to the crying child. Her rage was at war with her fear. He was a monster. But he was a monster with a gun. He was the only other person in the world who knew her secret. And the men were still out there. He paused, his hand on the door bar. "Please," he said, "not to her, but to the child. Don't cry." Isabel's arm dropped. The poker stayed by the fire. She looked at him, her heart broken open, her hate and her need warring in her face. She said nothing. She just turned away from him and walked to the corner, clutching Espera, and sank to the floor, her back to him. She began to rock the baby, humming a low, broken tune. She hadn't forgiven him. She hadn't told him to stay. She just hadn't made him leave. Eli let his hand fall from the door. He didn't go back to his cot. That felt too close, too intimate. He slid down the wall next to the door, the cold from the wood seeping into his back. He pulled his wounded side in, wincing. She was in the far corner, by the hearth. He was by the door. The fire burned down to embers, casting long, fearful shadows. The baby fussed, then fell quiet. They sat there for hours, their backs to the wall, a chasm of blood and memory between them, afraid of the firelight showing through the cracks, afraid of the men who might be out in the snow, and now, terribly, afraid of each other. But still, they were in that room, still together. The silence that followed Eli's confession was a brittle, frozen thing. They had sat all night, separated by the width of the cabin, the embers of the fire casting a weak, red light on two people trapped by more than just the snow. Isabel had not spoken to him, not looked at him. She tended to Espera with a fierce, quiet desperation. And when she slept, she did so on her own cot, the rifle on the floor beside her. Eli stayed by the door, a guard for a woman who now hated him. The snow, however, was indifferent to their fragile truce. It kept falling. It was a soft, relentless whisper that was slowly burying them. Eli's wound had healed to a deep, pulling ache. He spent his days watching. The guilt from his confession had settled into a kind of grim resolve. He had been a coward once. He would not be one again. He would stand on this patch of frozen ground for this woman and her child, because there was nothing else left for him to do. He was standing at the small window, which he had cleared of frost with his glove. When he saw it, the world outside was a blinding sheet of white, the canyon walls blurred by the falling snow, but on the far ridge, barely a pencil stroke against the gray sky, was a shape. It was dark, and it was still. A man on a horse. He was too far to be a threat, but he was not lost. He was not traveling. He was watching. Eli's blood went cold. "Isabel." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. She was in the back, changing the baby. She came out, her face pale and drawn. "What?" "Get back from the window," he said. He didn't turn. "There's a rider on the high ridge to the north." He heard her sharp intake of breath. He heard her footsteps falter. Are you sure?" "He's been sitting there for 10 minutes, Eli said. "He's not moving. He's watching the smoke." He heard a small, muffled sound. He turned. Isabel had backed against the wall, her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond reason. It was the absolute certainty of doom. "He found us," she whispered. The words were choked. Oh God, he found us. It's him. It's them. They're coming! She began to shake, her body trembling so violently she could barely stand. They're going to kill her. They're going to kill my baby. They're going to... She slid down the wall, her despair total. We're dead. We're all dead. No, Eli said. His voice was hard. He walked to her. He didn't try to touch her. He just stood over her. You're not dead. Not yet. What? What can we do? She cried, looking up at him. He'll go back. He'll get the others. They'll come. We can't fight them. I can, Eli said. She stared at him, her grief momentarily forgotten, replaced by the bitter memory of his confession. You? She spat. You'll... What? Hold their horses? The words hit him, as intended. He flinched, but his gaze did not waver. No, I'll shoot them, but I can't do it alone. Get up. Isabel. Why? She hissed. Why would you stay? They're not your enemies. You said it yourself. You rode with them. Maybe they're your friends. Maybe you led them here. The accusation was ugly, but he understood it. They're not my friends, he said, his voice low, and I've got no more friends in this world. I'm staying because I am. Now get up. We don't have time for this. I don't want your help, she cried, but the words were weak. The fear was stronger than her anger. She was terrified, and he was the only other person in her world. You don't have a choice, he said, not unkindly. And neither do I. Now, how much ammunition do you have? Her fear, her hatred, and her desperate need for survival warred on her face. At last, the need won. She swallowed, her eyes still wet, but a new, hard light entering them. She pushed herself up from the floor. For the rifle, maybe 30 rounds. For my father's pistol, a box, maybe 50. Get it, he said. All of it. The cabin, once a refuge, became a fortress. The work was grim, and it bound them together. They didn't speak of the past. They spoke only of the task. We need to brace the door, Eli said. He found an old pickaxe handle in the storage room. We can wedge this under the bar. It'll hold for a minute. At least. They worked together, their hands brushing. Isabel pulled. He hammered. The window, he said, moving to it. They'll come through here. He found some old lengths of trapping chain. He nailed them across the shutter, reinforcing the wood. It wouldn't stop a determined man, but it would make noise. It would buy them seconds. We need water, he said. He pulled up the loose floorboard that led to her small, cold cellar. Fill every pot you have. Get all the food. Put it down there. And the baby. When it starts, she goes down there. She'll freeze, Isabel said, her voice numb. She'll be alive, Eli answered. They worked for hours. He stacked the wood pile against the weakest part of the back wall. He found her father's old pistol, a heavy Navy Colt. He cleaned and oiled it, his movements practiced and efficient. He checked his own gun. Then he looked at her rifle. You know how to use this? My father taught me, she said. To hunt deer. You're not hunting deer, he said. Bring it. He took her outside. The rider on the ridge was gone. The world was silent, white, and expectant. The cold was brutal. Find a target, he said. He pointed to a black rock jutting out from the snow. 50 yards away. Aim for that. She raised the rifle. Her hands were shaking. She fired. The shot was a flat crack in the heavy air. The snow kicked up, 5 feet to the left. You're pulling, he said. He stepped behind her. You're afraid of it. He put his hands on her, one on her shoulder, one on her arm, steadying her. She flinched at his touch, but she didn't pull away. Your shoulder, he said, his voice low, right by her ear. Keep it tight to the stock. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it. Squeeze it, like you're squeezing a hand. He was close. She could feel the heat from his body, smell the faint scent of wood smoke and sweat. It was a strange, terrifying intimacy. He was teaching her how to kill. Breathe out, he said, and squeeze. She fired again. The bullet struck the rock. sending a chip of stone flying. "Good," he said. He stepped back. "Do it again." She fired, again and again. Each shot was closer. The fear in her hands was being replaced by a cold, mechanical focus. She was not the same woman who had cried on the floor. When she was done, he nodded. "You'll do." They went back inside. The air in the cabin was thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. They were ready, or as ready as they could be. They sat at the table, the guns between them. "Isabel," he said, looking at her. "If they come, if there's more than 2 or 3, they'll probably try to burn us out." She just watched him, her face pale. I'll try to stop them, but I'm just one gun. We need a plan. For you. For Espera. We fight," she said, her voice hard. "No, I fight. You run." "I'm not leaving," she said. I'm not a coward. This ain't about being a coward," he said, his voice rising. "This is about that child. You said it yourself. They want her dead. You're the only one who can protect her. Your job, your only job, is to get her out of here. Mine is to give you the time to do it." He pointed to the back storage room. "There's a small vent, up high, for smoke. It's just rock. I looked at it. A man couldn't fit, but you." "You're small. It'll lead out, onto the high ledge. It'll be a hard climb, but it's the only way." She stared at him, understanding. He was planning to die here. "No," she whispered. "Yes," he said. If it goes bad, if they breach the door. You don't fight. You don't wait. You grab that child, and you get to that vent. You run. You don't look back. You just go. Promise me." "Eli, promise me. Isabel, promise me you'll save her." She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. She saw the truth in his face. He was offering her the one thing he had left, his life. I promise," she whispered. The pact hung in the air, sealing their fates together. The waiting was the worst part. The day bled into a long, cold afternoon. Every gust of wind was the sound of riders. Every snap of the fire was a gunshot. They sat by the hearth. The baby was mercifully quiet. The silence in the cabin stretched. It was too heavy. It needed to be filled. Eli stared into the fire. He was going to die here. He knew it. And he could not die with his last confession being the one that made her hate him. He needed her to know all of it. "The raid," he said, his voice flat. She tensed. She didn't want to hear it. "The one in Chihuahua." He pushed on, needing to purge himself. "I told you I held the horses." "Stop," she said. "No," he said. "You need to, I need to say it. It was hot, so hot, the dust. You couldn't breathe. They were drunk. They'd been riding for 3 days. They said the village was hiding rebels, but it was just families, old men, women." He was seeing it. His eyes were fixed on the flames, but he was 1,000 miles away. "They started shooting, just for sport. And then the screaming started." His voice cracked. "Just once. It was the women. They dragged them from the huts into the square. The men I rode with. They were laughing. Isabel." He looked at her. His face was gray. They were laughing, and the women, they were screaming. A sound. I'll never get out of my head. It was what you said. They hurt them over and over, and I checked the horses' tackle. I retied their leads. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I was just there for the pay, that I wasn't one of them. He let out a long, shuddering breath. But I didn't stop it. I didn't even raise my voice. I stood there, and I listened. I listened to it all. And then I took my share of the gold. He fell silent. He had laid the last, most rotten piece of his soul on the floor between them. Isabel sat like a statue. He could feel the cold radiating from her. It was a coldness that had nothing to do with the snow. It was a coldness of absolute, pure judgment. She was silent for a full minute. Then, she slowly, deliberately, stood up. She walked to the table. She picked up a tin cup. Her hand was shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so deep it was seismic. You listen to that," she whispered. Her voice was dead, toneless. "You stood, and you listened, and you did nothing?" She turned to him. Her face was a mask of contempt. "You are worse than they are," she said. "They are animals. They don't know any better. But you stood there, you knew, and you chose. You chose the gold." Her voice rose, breaking. You are a coward. You are the lowest thing." She threw the cup. It wasn't aimed at him. It was aimed at the wall, at the world, at him. It clattered to the floor. A small, pathetic, angry sound. "Get out!" she hissed, the venom returning, 1,000 times stronger. "Get out of my home, now! I will not die next to a coward. I will not let my child breathe the same air. Get out!" This time, he didn't argue. He had seen this coming. He deserved it. He stood up, his body aching. He picked up his jacket. He gave her one last look. Her face was twisted with a hatred that was righteous and absolute. He nodded, a single, sharp movement of acceptance. All right. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the heavy bar, and from the back room, Espera began to cry. It was not the fussy cry of a hungry baby. It was a high, thin wail of pure terror. She had felt the rage in the room. She had felt the violence. Isabel's head snapped toward the sound. "No, no, no! Hush! Hush!" She ran to the back room. The wailing intensified. It was a scream, raw and frantic. "Hush, my love! I'm here! I'm here!" But the baby didn't stop. She was hysterical, choking on her own sobs. Eli stood, his hand on the door bar, frozen. He was halfway out, halfway in. Isabel came back out, her face frantic, the screaming baby in her arms. She was rocking her, patting her, but the child was inconsolable. "What is it? What's wrong? Please, Espera, please! You have to be quiet! Please!" The child's screams echoed in the small cabin. Eli turned. He let his hand fall from the bar. He took one step back into the room. The baby's screams faltered. Just for a second, she choked, and then wailed again. He took another step. He was closer now. The baby's cries quietened. She was still sobbing, but the frantic, hysterical edge was gone. She was listening. Isabel had frozen, watching him. Eli stopped, a few feet away. He didn't reach for the child. He just stood there. He was a presence, a low, steady, quiet presence. Espera's wide, dark eyes, wet with tears, fixed on his face. Her sobs became whimpers. And then she was quiet. She just stared at him. Her little chest hitched, but she was quiet. Isabel looked from the now silent child to the man she had just condemned. Her face was a ruin of confusion, anger, and a terrible, shocked vulnerability. He didn't leave. He walked, not to the door, but back to the fire. He sat down on the floor, picked up his blanket, and wrapped it around his shoulders. He didn't look at her. He just stayed. Night fell. The cabin was thick with unspoken things. Isabel put Espera back to sleep, her movements slow and dazed. Neither of them ate. The bread and jerky sat on the table, untouched. Eli was on his blanket by the fire, his back to her cot. He was waiting for the riders. He was waiting for morning. He was waiting to die. He heard her move. He tensed, expecting her to start screaming at him again. But the sound was her feet, bare on the cold stone floor. He felt a dip in the blanket beside him. He turned his head, slowly. She had laid down on the floor. Not on her cot, on the floor, on the very edge of his blanket. She was an arm's length away. She didn't touch him. She didn't look at him. She just lay down, her back to him, and she closed her eyes. It was not forgiveness. It was not an invitation. It was an admission that the terror of the men outside was, for this one night, greater than the terror of the man beside her. It was an admission that being alone was impossible. He did not sleep. He watched the fire die. He listened to the wind. He woke before dawn. The cabin was freezing. The fire just a handful of red coals. Sometime in the night, she had turned. She was facing him. Her hand, seeking warmth, was resting on his chest. He held his breath. He didn't move. He just looked at her. Her face, in the faint gray light, was stripped of its anger. She looked young, and so tired. Her eyes opened. They were inches apart. She didn't pull away. She just looked at him. There was no anger, no hatred, just a vast, empty loneliness. He saw his own brokenness reflected there. He raised his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused from the axe. He hesitated. Then he touched her cheek. She flinched, a small, sharp movement, but she didn't pull back. Instead, a small sound, a broken sigh, escaped her. She leaned into his touch. Her eyes closed. He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of desperation. It tasted of salt and wood smoke and sorrow. It was a raw, hopeless clinging. He pulled her closer. She came. They made love right there on the hard floor, in the cold, by the dying fire. It was quiet. It was desperate. It was the only way they had to speak, to hold off the darkness. It was two broken souls trying to find one whole piece of humanity in each other. For one last moment, it was a way to feel, not like a monster or a victim or a coward, just a man and a woman. When it was over, the silence that rushed in was worse. The reality of what they had done and what waited for them outside came crashing down. Isabel pulled away from him. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her dress, clutching it to her chest. She went to the darkest corner of the cabin, the one farthest from him, and curled into a ball. Her shoulders began to shake. The sobs were silent, but they racked her entire body. Eli felt a fresh wave of shame, colder than the floor. He had taken something else from her, the one thing she had left. He got up, pulling his own trousers on. He didn't know what to do. He went to her. He didn't try to hold her. He just sat on the floor beside her, his back against the cold wall. He offered her the only thing he could, his presence. They sat like that as the cabin grew light, her silent weeping the only sound. After a long time, he reached out. He rested his hand on her hair. He said nothing. He asked nothing. Her weeping subsided. She was empty. She leaned her head back, just slightly, until it rested against his knee. He could feel the dampness of her tears through the wool of his trousers. He waited. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was a shredded whisper, so low he barely heard it. "I don't want," she said, "I don't want to be angry anymore." He closed his eyes. He had no answer for that. He just kept his hand on her head, a silent, steady promise in the cold, gray dawn. The uneasy quiet of the dawn held for 2 days. The anger between them had burned away, leaving an empty, cold space filled with a shared, unspoken dread. They moved around each other with a strange, new tenderness, born of desperation and a fragile, desperate coming together on the cold floor. The snow had stopped. A weak, watery sun appeared, and the world began to drip. The thaw was not a promise of spring. It was a threat. It meant the passes would clear. It meant travel was possible. Eli knew he had to check the water. The barrel in the cabin was low. He took the bucket, his rifle in his other hand. "I'll be quick," he said. Isabel just nodded, her eyes fixed on the door, the bar still in place. He made his way down the slippery, half-frozen path to the small creek that ran at the base of the cliff. The water was running high, choked with slush. He dipped the bucket, the cold biting at his fingers. He scanned the opposite bank, his eyes tracking every shadow. He felt exposed. He turned to go, and he saw it, half buried in the muddy, thawing bank. Not 10 feet from where he stood was a horseshoe. It was not his. His mare had been unshod on one side. It was not old, left by some long-gone traveler. The rust on it was fresh, red, and the mud around it was stamped with the clear, sharp print of a shod horse. Someone had been here, at his waterline, within the last day. He left the bucket. He moved back up the path, low and fast, the rifle heavy in his hands. He didn't burst into the cabin. He eased the door open, slipped inside, and barred it. Isabel looked up, her face white. "What is it? You left the water." There was a shoe by the creek. He dropped it on the table. The sound of the metal on the wood was a death knell. Someone was scouting us. Close! "The man on the ridge," she whispered. "He came down," Eli said, his voice grim. "He was close enough to smell our smoke, to see the window. He knows we're here." He grabbed his coat. "I have to see. I have to know how many." "Eli, no, don't leave me." "I'm not leaving you," he said. He checked his pistol. "I'm finding out what's coming. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it. Not for any sound. Not unless you hear my voice. 3 times. Understood?" She nodded, her hand already on the heavy timber bar. He went out, but not down the path. He went up, scrambling along the rock ledge. Using the skills he had learned hunting men, he moved in a wide, careful circle, staying to the high ground. It took him 2 hours. The sun was higher now, casting weak shadows. He found them. On the ridge, the one where he'd seen the lone rider. The snow was trampled. Not by 1 horse, by 4. They had camped there, cold, for at least a night. They had a commanding view of the cabin. They could see every time the door opened. They were patient. They were professionals. He followed the tracks down, toward the canyon head. They had retreated, back to a larger, more sheltered camp. But they were still here. They were watching. They were waiting. He was a bounty hunter. He knew the tactics. They were boxing him in. They knew he was here. They were just deciding when to spring the trap. He returned to the cabin, his face a mask of cold stone. He gave the signal, and Isabel let him in. He didn't have to say anything. She saw it in his eyes. "How many?" she asked, her voice flat. "I saw tracks for 4, he said, but they went back to a main camp. There could be more, a lot more." Her first instinct, the one that had kept her alive for 6 months, kicked in. "We have to run." She began to move, grabbing a sack, throwing jerky and hardtack into it. We can go tonight. When it's dark, we can take the high trail." "Isabel." She kept packing, her movements frantic. "I can wrap her. I can keep her warm. Inside my coat. We can—" "Isabel, stop." He put his hand on her arm. She froze, and she listened. From the back room, from the small crate, came a small, wet cough, a tiny, struggling sound. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a new, different kind of terror. She's got a cold. The draft from the vent." "I know," he said softly. "The snow has stopped, but the air is poison. That wind, it's a blade. She won't survive 2 hours out there. Isabel, not in the high passes, not at night. She's too small." Isabel's hands fell from the sack. The truth of it settled on her. She looked at the bolted door, then at the rifle on the wall. So we stay. We stay here, and we let them—" "We stay," Eli said, his voice hard. "But we don't let them." She looked at him. The choice was made. Leaving was certain death for Espera. Staying was a fight they could not win. It was suicide. But it was the only choice they had. "We fight," she said, her voice a whisper, but the whisper was steel. That night, They sat in the dark. They did not risk a fire. The cold of the cabin was a physical weight, pressing in on them. They sat side by side on the cot, wrapped in every blanket they owned, the baby bundled between them. They were just waiting. And then Isabel gasped. Eli was already moving. He'd seen the flicker. He went to the window, peering through the small crack in the shutter. On the high ridge, the very one where he had seen the tracks, a light blossomed. Not a small campfire, a bonfire, a great roaring blaze that lit up the canyon walls, casting huge, dancing shadows. It was a beacon. It was a message. We see you. We are here. We own the night, the arrogance of it, the cruelty. It was a way to break their spirit before the fight even began, to let them sit in their cold, dark box and watch the enemy's strength, to let the fear eat them alive. Isabel came to stand beside him. She watched the fire, her hand clutching his arm. She was shaking. Eli put his arm around her. He watched the flames, and his face hardened. The fear was burning out of him, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. "I know who it is," he said, his voice flat. She turned to look at him. "I know the man who leads them. His name is Corbett. He likes to be called Captain Corbett." He turned from the window, pulling her with him. He led her back to the cot, and they sat. The roaring fire from the ridge cast a faint, flickering orange light into the cabin. "He's not like other men, Isabel. He's not a bandit. He's worse. He's a patriot. He calls himself, he believes, truly believes, that he is doing God's work, that he's cleansing this territory, making it pure for real Americans." Eli stared at his hands. He sees the world, in black and white. There's his way, and there's filth, and he is ruthless. He's cruel, because he thinks his cruelty is justice. He doesn't just kill a man. He erases him. He burns his home. He salts the earth. He calls it finishing the job. The words hung in the air, the same words she had used to describe the men who attacked her sister. You knew him," she whispered. "I rode with him," Eli confessed. The shame was back, but it was different now. It was not the shame of a coward. It was the shame of a man who had been a fool. "After I lost everything, my wife, my farm, I was empty. I was nothing. And he found me. He gave me pay. He gave me a purpose, a flag. I believed him. For a while, I thought we were bringing law. I didn't want to see. I chose not to see what we really were, what he was. I followed him. Isabel, I followed him out of desperation, because I was weak." He turned to her, and his eyes, in the flickering firelight, were clear. "But I'm not weak anymore, and I'm not desperate. I see him. I see what he is, and he is not touching you. He is not touching that child." He took her hand. "I followed him once to save my own skin. I swear to you, I will kill him now to save yours." Isabel looked at him. She saw the man who had held the horses, the man who had broken down in guilt, but she also saw the man he was now, a man who had made a choice. He was not staying out of guilt. He was staying out of something else, something solid. She squeezed his hand. Her trust, which had been a fragile, broken thing, mended. It became whole. She believed him. "I know," she said. She got up. She went to the back room, to the loose stone in the wall she had never shown him. She pulled it out. From the hollow, she removed a small, leather-bound book. She brought it to him. "Elena's," she said, her voice thick. "My sister's journal. I want you to read it. I want you to know what this is for." She lit a single, small candle, shielding it in a deep pot so the light would not escape the cabin by its tiny, guttering flame. Eli read. The first pages were a young woman's thoughts, the ranch, her father, a dress she wanted to make. Then the entries stopped. They started again. Weeks later, the handwriting was different, shaky, broken. He read the account of the attack, his stomach coiling into a knot of cold fury. But the last pages were not about that. They were written in the last few weeks of her life. They were about the baby. It moves. I feel it. A flicker, like a little bird in a cage. I should hate it. I tried to hate it. But it is not him. It is mine. It is a part of me. I am so afraid, but I feel a strange love. I will call her Espera, because she is all the hope I have left. I pray she has my hair, not his, but I will love her. I will love her no matter what. I will love her enough for both of us. Eli closed the book. His hand was shaking. He looked at Isabel, his eyes wet. He finally understood. This was not just about protecting a child from monsters. This was about protecting a hope. She was brave, he whispered. She was, Isabel said, taking the journal back. She was braver than all of us. She looked at the book in her hands. They can't find this. They can't touch it. No, Eli said. Together, they took the journal. Isabel added a small, whittled wooden cross that had been her father's. They didn't wait. They went out into the cold night, the bonfire on the ridge their only light. They went to the tree line, under a tall, silent pine. The snow was thin. With his knife, Eli dug into the frozen earth. It was hard, slow work. When the hole was deep enough, Isabel knelt. She kissed the journal, and she placed it, and the cross, into the dark earth. They covered it. They packed the dirt and covered it with snow. It was a burial, a final closure for Elena, a final farewell. They stood there for a long moment, two small, dark figures against the snow, united in their purpose. Then they turned and went back to the cabin to wait for the war. The long night passed, frozen and silent. The bonfire on the ridge burned down to embers, just as the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. Eli was at the window. He hadn't slept. He was watching. He expected them at sunfall. Corbett was a man for grand gestures, for dramatic, final battles, but Corbett was also a predator, and predators are patient until they are not. The sound was not a warning. It was a single, sharp crack that exploded the morning silence. Wood splintered next to Eli's head. A bullet tore through the shutter, burying itself in the wall behind him. They were early. Down! Eli roared, pulling Isabel from the cot. Get in the cellar, now! She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the sleeping Espera, wrapped her in a blanket, and scrambled for the trapdoor. Eli, she cried, looking back at him. Go, I'll hold them. She vanished into the dark, pulling the door closed. Eli moved, low and fast, to the window. He peered through the new bullet hole. The light was gray, watery. He saw movement, rocks, 3 men, dismounted, spreading out. He had to buy time. He had to make them think he was alone. He raised his own voice, making it loud, projecting it, faking a casual, unworried tone. Isabel, honey, stay down. Seems we got some rowdy neighbors. I'll handle it. He was setting a scene. The homesteader, protecting his wife. A voice called out. It was not a shout. It was a clear, confident, carrying voice. A voice used to command. Eli, you old dog, don't play stupid. I know that's you. I recognized your sloppy tracks a mile off. A man stood up from behind a large boulder. He was tall, wearing a long, dark coat. He had no hat. His hands were held wide, away from his pistols, in a mockery of peace. It was Corbett. His face was hard, clean-shaven, with a self-righteous set to his jaw. What in God's name are you doing, boy? Corbett called, his voice laced with a cold, paternal disappointment. Holding up in this shack, protecting that we thought you were dead. Go away, Corbett, Eli shouted back, his rifle resting in the crack of the shutter. This is not your business. This is my home." Corbett laughed, a loud, booming laugh that echoed in the cold air. "Your home? This is a stain, a boil, and it's my business to lance it. We are here to cleanse this territory. Eli, you know the work. We have a job to finish, a loose end. From that business down south, a piece of filth that was left behind. The girl who ran, and the thing she took with her." He took a few steps closer. He was still 50 yards away, but his voice was clear. "I'm offering you a chance. Eli, for old times. My partners, they're eager, but I am a forgiving man. I am offering you redemption." "I don't want your redemption," Eli said. "You walk away." "No," Corbett said, as if just having a better idea. "You help us. You finish the job for us. Prove your loyalty. Prove you're still one of us, still a white man. You do that, and there's gold in it. Your full share. And forgiveness. We can forget all this. You can ride with us again. Ride for a clean, pure America." Eli's aim was steady. The man's chest was clear in his sights. But there were two others, hidden. He let his voice go cold. Dead. "I told you to go away, Corbett." The smile on Corbett's face vanished. The mask of the righteous patriot fell, and the killer was left. "You always were a fool. Eli, always weak, soft, choosing that filth over your own kind, over your own race." He raised his hand, a signal to his hidden men. "You've made your choice. We'll be back. We'll be back by sunfall, with the rest of the men, and we will burn that cabin to the ground. We will burn it until it is nothing but ash, with you and that stain inside it." Corbett turned, his back to the cabin, a gesture of absolute contempt. He and his men melted back into the rocks. The silence that returned was heavier, colder. Eli let out a long breath. He turned from the window. The trapdoor creaked open. Isabel's face appeared, pale as the snow, her eyes wide with terror. She was clutching Espera so tightly her knuckles were white. They hadn't been saved. They had only been given a deadline. Sunfall. Sunfall. The word hung in the cabin, as heavy and cold as the air. Corbett was gone, his threat left behind like a stain. Eli barred the door. He turned and looked at Isabel. She was still standing where she had emerged from the cellar, her face the color of ash. She was holding Espera so tightly the child let out a small, pinched cry. He meant it," she whispered. "I know," Eli said. Sunfall. She looked at the single window, where the weak morning light was just beginning to strengthen. The sun had become their executioner, its slow arc across the sky a countdown. We can't run," she said, her voice hollow. She looked at Espera. The child's cough was faint, but wet. "He's right. The cold. It will kill her." "We're not running," Eli said. He walked to the table and laid his pistol on it. He began, with slow, deliberate movements, to check his rifle, ejecting each cartridge and wiping it clean before slotting it back into the magazine. The decision was made. There was no discussion. There was no hope of escape. There was only the fight. Leaving was suicide. Staying was suicide. But staying meant they could take some of them with them. Staying meant they could die on their feet. The hours of the middle day were the worst. They were a strange, agonizing peace. The sun climbed. The cabin was silent. They had done all they could. The door was barred. The window shuttered tight, with only the smallest slit for Eli's rifle. The water was in the cellar, along with the last of the food. Eli tried to get Isabel to stay in the cellar. "It's safest, below ground." "No," she said. She was calm. The terror had burned out, leaving a hard, cold resolve. "Not yet. I will not spend our last hours hiding in a hole, not while the sun is still up." He understood. He lifted the heavy bar, and for a moment, he opened the cabin door. Light flooded in, bright and clean on the snow, The air was frigid, but pure. The bonfire on the ridge was a black, smoking scar. The world was beautiful, and empty, and waiting. They brought Espera out from the back room. Isabel unwrapped her from the heavy furs and blankets. The child's fever was gone, but she was small, and her breathing was shallow. They sat, all three of them, on the cot, huddled together for warmth. For the first time, and perhaps the last, they sat as a family. The quiet was so deep. Eli could hear the child's faint breath. He found himself talking, his voice low. "The ocean. I told you I saw it. It sounded like a great animal, breathing, sleeping. It went on forever. So big, it made a man feel like nothing, but in a good way, a clean way." Isabel rested her head on his good shoulder. He was surprised by the simple, trusting weight of it. "Elena, my sister," she whispered, her eyes on Espera's face. She loved the color yellow. She said it. It was the color of a happy sound. She had a laugh. It wasn't loud. It was like water over stones. She wasn't crying. She was just remembering. She was painting a picture of the person they were fighting for, the memory that Espera's life protected. She would have loved her so much, Isabel said, her finger tracing the child's dark, fine hair. Eli said nothing. He just put his arm around her. They held the child together. They watched the patch of sunlight on the floor as it slowly crept from the wall, across the swept earth, and toward the door. They watched their time run out. Late in the afternoon, the light in the cabin turned a deep, burnt orange. The sun was touching the tops of the far canyon wall. It was time. Isabel laid Espera in the cellar, wrapped in every blanket. The child whimpered at the cold and the dark. "I know, my love, I know," Isabel whispered, her voice breaking for the first time that day. I will be right here. I will not leave you." She closed the trap door. She stood and went to the back room, to the loose stone where she kept her sister's journal. She reached in, but she did not pull out the book they had buried. She pulled out something else, a small, simple rosary of dark, polished wood beads. She came to Eli, who was standing at his post by the window, the rifle in his hands. She held it out to him. This was hers," she said. "Elena's. She prayed on it every night, even after." Eli looked at the cross. He was not a man of God. He was not a man who prayed. "Isabel, I don't—" "I know," she said, her voice fierce. She pressed it into his hand. His large, calloused fingers closed around the small, smooth beads. That man, Corbett, he is filled with a kind of hate that thinks it's holy. He wants to destroy, to cleanse. He thinks he is right." She put her hand over his, pressing the rosary into his palm. You have to fight. You have to kill. I know that, but I'm asking you, do not become him. Do not let that same hate be what drives you. You are not destroying. You are protecting. You are protecting something sacred. She tapped his fist, where the rosary was hidden. Protect her. Eli, not just with the gun, but in here. She touched her own heart. Remember what is sacred. He looked at her, at the desperate, profound truth in her eyes. He nodded. He said nothing. He slipped the wooden rosary into his trouser pocket. It was a small, hard weight against his leg. A promise. He handed her the navy colt. "Keep this. Stay by the cellar. Don't come out, no matter what." "I will," she said. He barred the door. He went to the window, and they waited. The sun vanished. It did not set. It just fell. One moment, the snow was lit with red. The next, The canyon was a deep, blue-black bowl of shadow. The air became instantly, brutally cold. Silence. A full 5 minutes passed. Nothing. Eli strained his ears. He heard the wind. He heard the faint drip of a thawing icicle. Then, a sound. Not a gunshot. A whoosh and light. A torch, arcing through the air, tumbling end over end, landed on the snow 20 feet from the cabin. It was a marker. Then another, and another. They came from all sides. And then he saw them. Figures, dark against the snow, moving in the twilight. Not 3, 6 men, rifles in their hands, torches held high. "They're here," he said, his voice flat. One of the men gave a great shout. A torch was thrown. It landed on the small, lean-to shed attached to the cabin, where Isabel kept her firewood. The dry pine and cured pelts went up, not with a spark, but with an explosion of flame. In seconds, the entire side of the cabin was lit with roaring, orange fire. At the same instant, the world exploded. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Bullets thudded into the cabin walls. A relentless, deafening drumming. Crack, crack, whine, thud. Eli raised his rifle. He found his target, a man, silhouetted against the new fire, raising his own gun. Eli squeezed the trigger, just as he had taught Isabel. "Squeeze." The man folded. He didn't make a sound. He just dropped. "One," Eli muttered. He worked the lever, found another, fired. A yell, another man down, or at least wounded. Crawling for the rocks, the fire was spreading. The roof of the lean-to was catching. Smoke was beginning to pour through the chinks in the cabin wall. Eli was focused. He saw a man, flanking left, trying to get to the back of the cabin, to the vent. He swung the rifle. He never saw the man on the right. A white-hot poker slammed into his left shoulder. The force of it threw him backward, away from the window, onto the hard-packed floor. The rifle clattered from his numb hands. The pain was a blinding, white sheet. He couldn't breathe. He heard a ringing in his ears. His arm was gone. He couldn't feel it. He heard a sound. Over the ringing. Isabel. A short, sharp scream. He rolled over, gritting his teeth against the agony. The front door. The bar was splintering. A heavy boot kicked it. Once, twice. The bar snapped. The door flew open, crashing against the wall. A man stood there, laughing, his face lit by the fire. It wasn't Corbett. It was a younger man, with a wild beard. "Well, looky here." He grinned, his eyes landing on Isabel, who was standing frozen, her back to the cellar door. "The captain said there was a prize." He lunged, not for Isabel, but for the trap door. "Give me the little half-breed. The captain wants it." He grabbed for the ring on the door. Isabel moved. She was not a victim. She was not Elena. She was a mother, protecting her young. She raised the heavy Navy Colt with both hands, just as Eli had shown her, and pulled the trigger. The explosion inside the cabin was deafening. It was thunder. The man looked down. A dark, spreading stain appeared on his chest. He looked up at Isabel, his face a mask of pure, stupid surprise. Then he fell, face first, onto the floor. Isabel stared, her hands locked on the gun, smoke curling from the barrel. She was trembling, horrified. "Good," Eli choked out from the floor. "Good, reload." He was trying to push himself up with one arm. The smoke was getting thick. The heat was intense. A shadow filled the doorway. It was Corbett. He stood for a moment, taking in the scene. The dead man on the floor. Eli wounded and struggling. Isabel shaking, trying to reload the pistol. He smiled. It was a thin, cold smile of utter contempt. He ignored Eli. He stepped over his dead man, his boots loud on the floorboards. He walked toward Isabel. Well, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "A little desert cat, claws and all. I'm impressed." He stalked her as she fumbled with the cartridges. "But you're done, girl. You're Your little animal is done. Give it to me. No, she whispered. I am a patient man, Corbett said, stopping a few feet from her. But my patience is at an end. We are here to cleanse this place, to finish your sister's dirty secret. Give me that stain. He lunged, not to shoot her, to grab her, to push her aside and get to the cellar. Eli, she screamed. A roar. Eli was on his knees. He had his own pistol, the one he'd kept in his belt. His left arm was useless, but his right was steady. Corbett heard him. He turned. Eli fired. The bullet struck Corbett in the chest. The man stumbled, his eyes wide. Eli fired again. Corbett staggered, his hand going to his gut. Eli fired a third time. Corbett's face, that mask of righteous, patriotic certainty, dissolved. It was replaced by a simple, blank look of surprise. He was just a man, after all. But as he fell, his killer's instinct took over. He raised his own pistol, a reflexive, dying spasm. He fired. The shot was wild, but in the small cabin, it was not wild enough. Eli grunted. A fresh, new, sickening impact. Low, in his side, the old wound or near it. This one was bad. He felt a terrible, wet heat. Corbett collapsed, his head hitting the leg of the table. He did not move again. Silence. The fire roared outside. The other men, the three who were left, they had seen it. They had seen their leader, their fanatic, their captain, walk into the cabin and not walk out. They heard the gunfire. They saw the blaze. They were just men, paid men, and the pay wasn't worth this. Eli heard them, shouting, cursing. Then the sound of horses, scrambling on the rock, fading, running. They were leaderless. They had fled. It was over. The silence in the cabin was broken only by the crackle of the fire, which was now licking at the main roof. Eli tried to stand. He couldn't. His legs wouldn't work. He fell forward, through the open doorway, and collapsed half in, half out of the cabin, his face landing in the cold, wet snow. He could see his own blood. It was black in the firelight, spreading, melting the snow around him. So much blood. He heard a sound, a wail, high and thin and terrified. Espera, the trap door. Then he heard his name. It was not a word. It was a scream, a sound of animal grief, of terror, of a heart being ripped open. Eli, Isabel, she was alive. He saw her. She scrambled out of the smoky cabin. She saw him. She fell to her knees in the snow beside him. No, please, God, no. She grabbed him, under his arms. She pulled. He was a dead weight. She was small, but her strength was a desperate, frantic thing. She screamed, a raw, wordless sound of effort and anguish. She dragged him inch by inch, pulling him out of the snow, away from the spreading fire, back over the threshold. She dragged him into the middle of the room, as far from the burning wall as she could get. Smoke was filling the cabin, thick and black. In the corner, by the open cellar, Espera was wailing, a constant, piercing cry against the cold. Dark night. The cabin was a vortex of smoke, blood, and the high, piercing wail of a terrified child. The fire roared, a hungry orange beast, chewing through the lean-to and tasting the main roof beams. Isabel grabbed Eli by the collar of his shirt. He was a dead weight, unconscious, his blood a slick, dark pool on the floor. She pulled. Her body screamed in protest, but a frantic, primal strength surged through her. She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, away from the collapsing, burning wall and into the relative safety of the room's center. Espera's cries were sharp, cutting through the chaos from the open cellar trap door. First, the child. Isabel scrambled, snatched the baby from the dark, cold hole, and bundled her in a thick wool blanket. She put her in the farthest, safest corner, as far from the fire and the smoke as possible. Second, the fire, the cabin, their only shelter, was dying. She grabbed the water bucket, less than a quarter full, and threw the water at the main beam where the flames were licking. It hissed, steamed, and smoked, but the fire retreated. It was not out, but it was beaten back. The lean-to collapsed outside with a crash of sparks and a sigh of embers. The wall was gone. A charred, gaping hole open to the black, freezing night. Third, Eli. She knelt beside him. The smoke was thick, stinging her eyes. His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. He was drowning. The bullet to his shoulder was a dark, seeping mess. But the one in his side, that was the one killing him. It was a well of dark, pulsing blood that would not stop. She knew what she had to do. There was no time for herbs, no time for bandages. There was only fire. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth, where the embers of their morning fire still glowed. It was not hot enough. Frantic, she blew on them, adding small splinters of wood. Her cheeks raw from the smoke. The iron tip began to glow a dull, menacing red. She ripped his shirt open. She pressed her hand to his chest. "You will not," she whispered, her voice a low, animal growl. "You will not leave me. You will not." She took the glowing poker. She closed her eyes for 1 second, a prayer of steel and desperation. Then she pressed the iron into the wound in his side. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin, a sickening, sharp scent. Eli's body arched off the floor in a silent, agonizing spasm. His back bowed. He did not wake, but his body screamed. Isabel held it, her hand steady, tears streaming down her face. Her jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. She held it until the bleeding stopped, until the wound was a black, seared crater. Then she did the shoulder. When it was done, she threw the poker down. It clattered on the stone. She collapsed, grabbing Espera, and huddled in the corner. She sat there, shaking, holding the whimpering child, listening to two sounds, the howl of the winter wind through the new hole in her home, and the faint, shallow, but continuing, breath of the man she had just saved. The next morning came gray and brutal. The cabin was a wreck. The bodies of Corbett and his man lay where they had fallen, frozen in their final, violent postures. The cold was a living thing, pouring through the burnt-out wall. Isabel's day was a blur of grim, necessary work. She would not live in a tomb. She covered Eli with every blanket. She took his pistol. She went outside. She put her hands under Corbett's arms and pulled. He was heavy, stiff. She dragged him, one step at a time, away from the cabin, down the slope. She left him in the snow for the elements. She did the same for the other man. She did not feel grief, or pity, or triumph. She felt nothing, just cold. She came back. She took snow and melted it. She scrubbed the floor. She scrubbed the blood from the packed earth until her fingers were raw. Then, the wall. She scavenged the charred timbers. She found old hides, pieces of canvas. She worked for 2 days without stopping, her hands splitting and bleeding in the cold. She hammered, she tied, she wove. The result was ugly, a patchwork of black wood and stiff animal skin. But it stopped the wind. Eli was a stone. He was lost in a deep, burning fever. He breathed, but he did not see. He did not hear. Winter, which had been cruel, now became a true enemy. The cold deepened. The high canyons were a frozen, silent prison. The food, the raiders had scattered some, and the fire had taken more. The cellar was nearly empty. A handful of dried beans, a few strips of jerky, a little flour. She began to ration. She boiled a single strip of jerky for hours, creating a thin, salty broth. She would dip her finger in it and wet Eli's cracked lips. She did not know if any of it got in. She boiled a few beans to a mash for Espera. For herself, she ate the snow. She ate the dregs in the pot. The days and nights bled together. There was no time. There was only a cycle of tasks. Feed the fire, check Eli, feed Espera, patch the wall. In the deep, endless nights, She sat by his cot. She would hold his hand. It was hot and dry. You can't go," she would whisper into the dark, her voice raw. "You are not allowed. I saved you. You are mine to save. You don't get to die. You stay. You hear me? Eli, you stay." Espera was weak. The cold and the smoke had settled in her chest. She cried. She fussed. She would not sleep. One night, in a moment of pure, bone-deep exhaustion, Isabel couldn't rock her anymore. She looked at Eli, a warm, still rock of fever. She laid the child down on the cot beside him, tucked against his good side. The crying stopped. Espera sighed, a small, weary sound, and burrowed into the blanket, her small body drawing warmth from his. She slept. It became their ritual, the dying man and the fragile child, curled together in the cot, sharing a single flickering thread of life. Weeks passed, a month, then another. The food was gone. Isabel was a wraith, her clothes hanging on her eyes hollow and dark. She had taken to trapping, setting small snares, but she caught little. One morning, the light in the cabin was different. It was pale, watery. She heard, dripping, the sound of the thaw. Eli's fever broke. He woke slowly, as if surfacing from a deep, dark water. His body was a map of fire. He couldn't move. He tried to open his eyes. He felt something, a warmth, a small, soft, breathing thing against his chest. He managed to get his eyes open. His vision was blurred. He looked down. It was Espera. She was asleep. Her dark, fine hair was spread on the blanket. Her tiny, copper-skinned hand was fisted, not in his beard, which was long and matted, but in the rough wool of his shirt. He stared. He remembered fire. He remembered Corbett. He remembered the blinding pain and the blood melting the snow. He looked around. The cabin was changed. The wall was an ugly patchwork of black wood and hide. It was clean, but stark, empty. He saw Isabel. She was standing at the hearth, stirring a tiny pot. She was so thin, skeletal. Her braid was gone, her hair shorter, matted. Her back was to him. She looked erased. "Isabel," he whispered. The word was a dry, broken sound. She froze. The spoon in her hand clattered against the iron pot. She did not turn. Her shoulders began to shake. She thought she was mad. She thought she was hearing a ghost. "Isabel," he tried again, a little stronger. She turned, her movements slow, mechanical, her eyes huge in her gaunt face. Found his. She saw them. Open, clear. She did not cry. She did not run to him. The relief was too vast, too terrifying. It held her fast. She took one uncertain step, then another. She stood over the cot. She looked at him. She looked at the baby curled against him. You came back," she whispered. How long?" he rasped. "The winter," she said, her voice hollow. It's gone. It's spring." He saw the cost in her face, in the barren room. You saved me." "I stopped the bleeding," she said, as if stating a fact. "The fire, the rest. That was you, and her." She nodded at the sleeping child. She was sick. She wouldn't sleep. Not unless she was with you. She kept you warm." He looked at the child, this small, innocent life, and he understood. They had held each other here. They had tethered each other to the world. He tried to lift his hand, his left arm. It was a dead thing, a scarred, useless weight. But his right hand worked. He raised it. Slowly, he reached out. He didn't touch her face. He just touched her hair. She closed her eyes, and she let the first tear of relief, of grief, of a terrible, hard-won hope. Fall. Spring came to the high canyon not as a gentle guest, but as a roaring flood. The snow melted in a rush, and the world became a chaos of mud and raging water. Eli healed. It was a slow, painful, ugly process. He had to learn his body again. His left shoulder was a knot of scarred, useless tissue. He would never hold a rifle with two hands. He would never be the man he was. He knew that, but he was alive. He learned to walk, leaning on a stick. He learned to do everything with one arm. And they began to rebuild. Not their bond. That was something else. Something forged and broken and forged again. They rebuilt the cabin. "We can't stay," Isabel said, watching the water rush by. "But we can't leave. Not yet. You're too weak, and we have nothing." "So, we build," Eli said, his voice still rough from disuse. They worked. It was a strange, silent partnership. He, with his one good arm, and she, with her new, wiry strength. He would go into the woods and, with a slow, clumsy, one-armed swing, fell small pines. She would help him drag them back. They talked, not about the fire, not about the blood. They talked about the wood, the mud, the baby. She was thriving. The weak, coughing child of winter was gone. The spring, the sun. She was growing. She would sit on a blanket, her dark eyes following them. And one day, she laughed. The sound, it was like Isabel's description of her sister, like water over stones. It was the first pure, good sound in that canyon in a year. Eli, he found himself changed. The hardness, the cold, it was gone. He sat one evening, and with his knife, he carved a small, rough bird from a piece of pine. His one-handed work was clumsy, but he finished it. He held it out to Espera. She took it, her tiny fingers closed around it. Isabel watched. Her heart. It was bruised thing, but it was beating the wall was rebuilt. It was not pretty. It was scare, but it was strong. One morning, the air was warm, truly warm. The sky was, and it was, and I was, it was, that it was, and bright, clear, 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 a clear, a clear, blue. They walked, Eli. He was not using the stick anymore. His step is stepping was slow, but it was steady. Isabel, she was carrying Aspera. They walked down to the tree line. Tall pine. They stood. This is still not correct. I must. The cabin was a vortex of smoke, blood, and the high piercing wail of a terrified child. The fire roared, a hungry orange beast, chewing through the lean-to and tasting the main roof beams. Isabel grabbed Eli by the collar of his shirt. He was a dead weight, unconscious, his blood a slick, dark pool on the floor. She pulled. Her body screamed in protest, but a frantic, primal strength surged through her. She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, away from the collapsing, burning wall and into the relative safety of the room's center. Esper's cries were sharp, cutting through the chaos from the open cellar trap door. First, the child. Isabel scrambled, snatched the baby from the dark, cold hole, and bundled her in a thick wool blanket. She put her in the farthest, safest corner, as far from the fire and the smoke as possible. Second, the fire, the cabin, their only shelter, was dying. She grabbed the water bucket, less than a quarter full, and threw the water at the main beam where the flames were licking. It hissed, steamed, and smoked, but the fire retreated. It was not out, but it was beaten back. The lean-to collapsed outside with a crash of sparks and a sigh of embers. The wall was gone. A charred, gaping hole opened to the black, freezing night. Third, Eli, She knelt beside him. The smoke was thick, stinging her eyes. His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. He was drowning. The bullet to his shoulder was a dark, seeping mess. But the one in his side, that was the one killing him. It was a well of dark, pulsing blood that would not stop. She knew what she had to do. There was no time for herbs, no time for bandages. There was only fire. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth, where the embers of their morning fire still glowed. It was not hot enough. Frantic, she blew on them, adding small splinters of wood, her cheeks raw from the smoke. The iron tip began to glow a dull, menacing red. She ripped his shirt open. She pressed her hand to his chest. "You will not," she whispered, her voice a low, animal growl. "You will not leave me. You will not." She took the glowing poker. She closed her eyes for 1 second, a prayer of steel and desperation. Then she pressed the iron into the wound in his side. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin, a sickening, sharp scent. Eli's body arched off the floor in a silent, agonizing spasm. His back bowed. He did not wake, but his body screamed. Isabel held it, her hand steady, tears streaming down her face. Her jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. She held it until the bleeding stopped, until the wound was a black, seared crater. Then she did the shoulder. When it was done, she threw the poker down. It clattered on the stone. She collapsed, grabbing Espera, and huddled in the corner. She sat there, shaking, holding the whimpering child, listening to two sounds, the howl of the winter wind through the new hole in her home, and the faint, shallow, but continuing, breath of the man she had just saved. The next morning came gray and brutal. The cabin was a wreck. The bodies of Corbett and his man lay where they had fallen, frozen in their final, violent postures. The cold was a living thing, pouring through the burnt-out wall. Isabel's day was a blur of grim, necessary work. She would not live in a tomb. She covered Eli with every blanket. She took his pistol. She went outside. She put her hands under Corbett's arms and pulled. He was heavy, stiff. She dragged him, one step at a time, away from the cabin, down the slope. She left him in the snow for the elements. She did the same for the other man. She did not feel grief, or pity, or triumph. She felt nothing, just cold. She came back. She took snow and melted it. She scrubbed the floor. She scrubbed the blood from the packed earth until her fingers were raw. Then, the wall. She scavenged the charred timbers. She found old hides, pieces of canvas. She worked for 2 days without stopping, her hands splitting and bleeding in the cold. She hammered, she tied, she wove. The result was ugly, a patchwork of black wood and stiff animal skin. But it stopped the wind. Eli was a stone. He was lost in a deep, burning fever. He breathed, but he did not see. He did not hear. Winter, which had been cruel, now became a true enemy. The cold deepened. The high canyons were a frozen, silent prison. The food, the raiders had scattered some, and the fire had taken more. The cellar was nearly empty. A handful of dried beans, a few strips of jerky, a little flour. She began to ration. She boiled a single strip of jerky for hours, creating a thin, salty broth. She would dip her finger in it and wet Eli's cracked lips. She did not know if any of it got in. She boiled a few beans to a mash for Espera. For herself, she ate the snow, she ate the dregs in the pot. The days and nights bled together. There was no time. There was only a cycle of tasks. Feed the fire, check Eli, feed Espera, patch the wall. In the deep, endless nights, she sat by his cot. She would hold his hand. It was hot and dry. You can't go," she would whisper into the dark, her voice raw. "You are not allowed. I saved you. You are mine to save. You don't get to die. You stay. You hear me? Eli, you stay." Espera was weak. The cold and the smoke had settled in her chest. She cried. She fussed. She would not sleep. One night, in a moment of pure, bone-deep exhaustion, Isabel couldn't rock her anymore. She looked at Eli, a warm, still rock of fever. She laid the child down on the cot beside him, tucked against his good side. The crying stopped. Espera sighed, a small, weary sound, and burrowed into the blanket, her small body drawing warmth from his. She slept. It became their ritual, the dying man and the fragile child, curled together in the cot, sharing a single, flickering thread of life. Weeks passed, a month, then another. The food was gone. Isabel was a wraith, her clothes hanging on her, her eyes hollow and dark. She had taken to trapping, setting small snares, but she caught little. One morning, the light in the cabin was different. It was pale, watery. She heard, dripping, the sound of the thaw. Eli's fever broke. He woke slowly, as if surfacing from a deep, dark water. His body was a map of fire. He couldn't move. He tried to open his eyes. He felt something, a warmth, a small, soft, breathing thing against his chest. He managed to get his eyes open. His vision was blurred. He looked down. It was Espera. She was asleep. Her dark, fine hair was spread on the blanket. Her tiny, copper-skinned hand was fisted, not in his beard, which was long and matted, but in the rough wool of his shirt. He stared. He remembered fire. He remembered Corbett. He remembered the blinding pain and the blood melting the snow. He looked around. The cabin was changed. The wall was an ugly patchwork of black wood and hide. It was clean, but stark, empty. He saw Isabel. She was standing at the hearth, stirring a tiny pot. She was so thin, skeletal. Her braid was gone, her hair shorter, matted. Her back was to him. She looked erased. "Isabel," he whispered. The word was a dry, broken sound. She froze. The spoon in her hand clattered against the iron pot. She did not turn. Her shoulders began to shake. She thought she was mad. She thought she was hearing a ghost. "I saw Bell. The wall was. I cannot. This is still broken. I will try to deliver the final part of the story as requested." One morning, the air was warm, truly warm. The sky was a bright, clear blue. They walked. Eli was no longer using the stick. His step was slow, but it was steady. Isabel was carrying Espera, who was awake, her dark eyes looking at the new green leaves on the aspens. They walked down to the tree line, to the tall pine that stood guard over the small, hidden patch of earth. They stood before the place where they had buried the journal. Eli looked at it. "She should have a name," he said. "She does," Isabel whispered. "The cross is in there." "No," he said. "A name, here, where the sun can touch it." He took his knife. His right hand was steady. He began to carve into the rough bark of the pine. He carved E-L-E-N-A. The letters were deep and rough, but clear. He stepped back. He looked at the name for a long moment. Then he stepped forward again. Beside her name, he began to carve another. I-S-O-B-E-L. She watched. Her breath caught in her throat. She saw her own name, linked with her sister's, on the living tree. He finished. He turned to her. "Why?" she whispered, her eyes shining. I am not dead." "No," he said, his voice soft. You are not, you are alive. You are the sister. You are here. You belong together. She stepped forward and touched the letters of her name. The bark was still fresh. She left her back to him, her shoulders shaking. I hated you, she confessed, the words torn from her. When you told me about the raid, I prayed you would die. I wanted God to strike you down. She turned, and her face was wet with tears, her eyes searching his. And now, she choked. Now, you are all I have. You and her. She took a step, her hands clenching. I don't know how to live if you go. He looked at her, this fierce, strong, broken woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. He stepped forward and took her face in his one good hand. Then I won't, he whispered. And he kissed her, not as they had before. In desperation and fear, he kissed her in promise. They knew they could not stay. The men who ran, Eli said, his voice hard, as they stood by the rebuilt wall. They know this place. They could come back. And this land, Isabel said, her voice sad. She looked at the canyon, her home. It holds too much blood. Espera, she cannot grow here, not safe. South, Eli said. We head south, to the border, or beyond, to a place where no one knows us, where a child like her can just be a child. They planned. They gathered what little they had. Eli had found one of the raiders' horses, wounded but alive. He had nursed it. It was strong now. It was not much. One horse for 2 adults and a baby. It will be slow, Isabel said. We have time, Eli answered. We have each other. The day came. The cabin was empty. The new wall was a scar. The graves of the men were gone, reclaimed by the wild. Eli mounted the horse. His left arm was in a sling he had made from hide, but he sat tall. Isabel handed him Espera. He settled the child, wrapped in her blanket, against his chest. Isabel looked at the cabin. She looked at the pine tree with the 2 names. She took a breath. Then she put her foot on Eli's boot, and he pulled her up, seating her behind him. She put her arms around his waist, her hands resting on the child. Together, the 3 of them rode down the canyon, away from the cabin. Behind them, the wind carried the ashes of the past, the faint smell of old fire and cold stone. But ahead of them, the sun was bright. The dirt trail was open, and there was the hope of peace. Thank you for listening to this story. We invite you to comment with where you are listening from to connect with each other. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in English.